Shaun Pinner is a former British soldier and Ukrainian Marine. He's written an extraordinary first-hand account of the war in Ukraine, his capture, imprisonment, and torture by the Russian invaders. Shaun was a retired and decorated British soldier living peacefully in Mariupol with his Ukrainian family. But the full-scale war began, and after fighting alongside Ukrainian army colleagues, he found himself imprisoned in Russian-occupied Ukraine and embarking on an unexpected and unimaginable fight for survival. After the horrors of frontline fighting, Shaun had to survive his capture by Russian soldiers and his removal to a black site, an off-grid FSB prison operating outside of all human rights conventions, where he was subjected to a campaign of torture by Putin's secret police. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. All our content is now also available on popular podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So please do like and subscribe, share the channel with your friends to help new people find our incredible speakers. Shaun, I'm delighted to welcome you to the channel.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Well, we had a bit of a warm-up chat before this, and this I think is going to be an incredibly insightful, also moving conversation, and incredibly important at this time to keep Ukraine in the headlines, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's taken a bit of a since Gaza and Israel, it's taken a bit of a back seat, really. So it's my job now to really, since my exchange, be able to keep promoting Ukraine, where I've lived here since 2018, and keep pushing that false narratives that Putin keeps pushing, to counteract that on social media. I've written a book, obviously, as you alluded to. We raise money for charity, and I'm more in a humanitarian role now. But yeah, we just pushed that Ukraine, so it's not pushed off the news completely.
And this is clearly a strategy of Putin. Whether or not Russia was involved in the detailed planning of the events in the Middle East, that is at this point really impossible to say. However, they have leveraged that crisis extensively to pour petrol on the flames. And there must be a worry that, given that seems to have been so successful in taking airtime off Ukraine, would you be surprised to see other conflagrations, other terroristic acts occurring where Russia may be either directly involved or inciting those for the same purpose, really, to try and deflect from their failures in Ukraine?
Obviously, yeah. I can only really talk about my time living in Mariupol before the Russian invasion. I was a part of the military. I was married to Ukrainian. I'd lived there for a significant amount of years before the full-scale invasion. It was my fourth tour on the front line. So every year prior to the invasion, we had that Russia would indeed invade. The difference last year was that it went from 150, 180, then to 200,000, and then 200,020. And then we were watching the vehicles come in with the Zeds. And then what became apparent was a lot of the media was based in Mariupol, moved to Dnipro. And then even my wife and most Ukrainians at the time were saying, yeah, it's not going to happen. It always sorts itself out. And unfortunately, for 5 years, we'd always had that Russia were going to invade, Russia were going to invade. Unfortunately, last year they did. And it caught Ukraine on the hop at that particular time. And, you can see what's happening now. Going back to your question, you can see what's happening now with Gaza, in Gaza, with Israel and Hamas, and Russia's embracing of Hamas. And for me, that's just Russia. It's what they do. They're clearly making moves to into Ukraine, want to deflect the interest in Ukraine now onto Gaza and Israel, so they can push the agenda in Ukraine, because they're bombing everything. I mean, for one thing, I go on about the ethnic cleansing. The Vova Belova, who said that they've taken 700,000 children into custody, and recently, the figures here officially are 20,000. They haven't moved, but it still goes on. They're still making advancements. They're still taking the children. So those kids are then put into re-education centers where they're trying to erase the culture of Ukraine. For me, that's that's ethnic cleansing. And I'd seen this in Bosnia in the early 90s. It's exactly the same situation. They're taking over areas, flooding the areas with Russians. When I was in Mariupol, there were Ukrainians wanting to get out of fighting and were told they wouldn't be allowed to go back to Mariupol for 3 years. So, and they were flooding the area with Chechens and Russians now because they kindly took me to the location after I was captured. About a month after I was captured, I was taken into Mariupol and was told that this was the devastation I'd caused, and it was my problem. The fact that Russia had superior air superiority and were able to just bomb anything they wanted to. It didn't matter whether you were Ukrainian or Russian. It was going the way of Grozny. It was just, they were bombing everything. So, there's nothing out of the realms that Russia won't do to take back Ukraine and possibly upset Transnistria in Moldova, push on Moldova, pushing more into Georgia. If Ukraine falls, that's where it's going to go, in my view.
And so you've served, I believe, in Northern Ireland and Bosnia, and I'm going to come to the sort of comparisons between the Ukraine war in a minute, but also Kosovo is another flashpoint, which Russia has really tried very hard to spark that up, hasn't it? And it now looks like it's getting closer to that kicking off as well. Now, Russia's involvement there is far, far clearer. Its support for Serbia, its corruption of the Serbian civil society, penetration of the police and military is starting to be documented in quite a bit of detail. But with your direct experiences there, is that another area you have deep concern for?
Well, yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time in Bosnia. I was really young at the time. I was quite 19 years old, really, but it was my first experience of war. To go to places like Vitez and Gorny Vakuf and Mostar and see the devastation, the size of North London just completely obliterated, was quite an eye-opener. And the talks of the ethnic cleansing that was going on there at Srebrenica. And I go back to what was happening in Mariupol, which I describe in my book as just the complete bombing of everything, carpet bombing everything, under the guise of narratives. For example, the denazifying of Ukraine. I lived in Mariupol. It just wasn't like that. Most of my friends are Russian-speaking Ukrainians. I learned Russian because I lived in Mariupol prior to the invasion. So the first language I picked up was Russian. My Ukrainian is really bad, and my wife's always must learn Ukrainian. I was like, I know, but we lived in Mariupol for 4 years, so I have to learn a new language. So that narratives that he keeps pushing are just being debunked, but he still keeps pushing them. Denazify anybody that doesn't believe in that Russian system or the Russian way of life is a Nazi. Yet Russia has a far bigger problem with far right than Ukraine, and they're using far right paramilitary groups to invade Ukraine. So it just never rang true with me. Not to mention that Mariupol was my home and I was defending the community and my family. The narratives were just rubbish. So really, when I was given the opportunity to pull back from the front lines, it was a no-brainer for me. I was just, I probably didn't realize at the time I was the tip of the spear because your news input and everything is blocked and blacked out. So you don't realize, I didn't realize till 6 or 7 days later how, probably, if I pardon the word, in the shit I was at the time, or how, at the tip of the spear I was at the time. So, Russia constantly pushes these narratives. And really, if you take all the chaff and all the crap surrounding the invasion of Ukraine, it's a land grab. That's all it is. Putin wants the Soviet Union back. He wanted the corridor between Mariupol and Odessa, and he's fallen quite short of that. In the 2 years of fighting, hasn't actually taken even Donbass. So, Ukraine has still lost a lot of ground, but it's also gained back 50% of what it's originally lost. So, for me, it was a no-brainer. Very proud of what what I did, and the decision I made to stay. I think you've got to have a long time living with yourself, really. So, for me, it was about a decision about honor and my community, and defending that. And Russia will just continue with the false narratives and the big disinformation campaign on the internet. They had a year prepping for that, year pushing those narratives out. If you go back and look on social media, they were pushing that, pushing that, pushing that. So they were thinking about this a year in advance. You don't just go in and invade a country overnight. They were considerably, uh, uh, you know, decided that they were going to go into Ukraine, but that was done 6, 7 months before. So any of those late talks to Macron went over to Putin, Zelensky was saying, look, for the sake of, joining NATO, we won't join NATO, for the sake of, we don't want you to invade. And it was already decided he was coming in.
This is it. And that is conveniently ignored in a lot of the propaganda as well. The genocidal rhetoric. So you speak Russian, of course, and that's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because you are able to understand not just the propaganda materials. You would have been able to understand the language of your captors. Did they know you spoke Russian? Did you speak Russian with them? Did that change how they interacted with you in any way? Did it make it worse, better, or not change anything at all?
It was a tool at the time when I was captured. They didn't really push me on that agenda. Why would an English guy know Russian? As far as the sort of ground level troops were, I was a mercenary, and never really pushed me on that. And I didn't want to tell them how much I knew at the time. So for me, it was about keeping that tool for me. It certainly helped me. I'm not fluent speaking, and I'm only just starting to read it after 4 or 5 years. But I know enough words and enough phrases, and I can pick out, you know, uh, phrases, and when people speak, I know what's going on. But when I spoke to someone actually in the prison from Moscow, I was gone. It's just a completely different dialect. I couldn't really understand that very harsh dialect. So the only way I'd sort of describe it to people is the snatch when the gypsies talk, and I was just lost with that. But I speak Suzik, which is a form of, if you ask a Russian when I was in prison, and they did ask me later on, they said it's bad grammar Russian, because it's a mixture of Ukrainian and Russian. For me, I learned Suzik because I lived in Mariupol. I didn't even know what Suzik was when I was learning Russian. And also, I didn't know what were Ukrainian words and what were Russian words at the time. So I just copied people and listened like a parrot, and ended up being able to communicate in the trenches. And when you do your first tour, you're talking Rusglish with people, guys that had never even spoke English before. And by the end of the tour, you've got guys that never spoke English before walking up to you saying, "Please sit down. Would you like chicken for dinner?" It's kind of like that. And in his trial and error, I mean, and being married to my wife, Larissa, there's only so many times you can say you're so beautiful when you speak to me and get angry a bit in Russian before you have to start learning the language, really. So,
Well, learn some
but
synonyms
yeah.
for that, haven't you? Yeah, maybe some poetry as well.
Yeah. But it certainly helped me. I got in an argument with one of the judges at the trial because she just her ears pricked up when I started speaking Russian, and she got very angry with me. Oh, you do understand Russian, and that was probably the first time that in about June I was captured in April the 13th, and about June really was where I went on the map for understanding a bit of Russian. But that gave me a tool in prison as well because it put me a higher rung above a lot of the other guys. I was with NGOs that didn't speak a lick of Russian. I was speaking with other military guys at Western captured who didn't speak any Russian, and also most Ukrainians could speak a bit of Russian. I've not met many that can't. And in prison, I was able to talk to other prisoners and other captives. And then I became a translator for the guards. I became a translator for the people. You then become used to the guards, so they don't give you such a hard time because they need you to make their life easier. And I was quite surprised how many of the prison guards didn't speak a word of English, maybe one or two, and that's it. So it certainly benefited me learning the language. I always, when I teach in NATO, troops now, because now I teach NATO countries, various departments who put in the training packages for the military. I don't only talk about my time captured because I was SEER trained, but I also talk about the culture in Ukraine, the culture in Russia. And I've sort of moved into that area. Now I go to sort of Denmark, Sweden, just got back from Canada, Norway. And I talk to these countries about being at war as well, you know, not in a conflict, going back to a patrol base and coming out from a patrol base and going back to work. I talk about living in trenches, how being in a trench, you live off the land, as well as build your fighting position, because the logistics are very bad. You can't, you know, guarantee that you're going to get MREs. I saw very few MREs when I was on the front line. So meals ready to eat. I don't really. I talk about a lot of things, not just my capture, but living and fighting in Ukraine on the front lines.
And this is fascinating. I mean, definitely want to dive into your experience under captivity, but the impression you get when you speak to military people, strategists, etc., is it concerning for you that in many ways, you know, the West has not fought a large-scale war like this really since something like sort of Vietnam, North Korea, you know, an incredibly brutal, large-scale war with the amount of, you know, mechanized armor, machinery, equipment, logistics that's required. Wars that have been fought more recently tend to be quite sort of at a distance, technological, over relatively quickly. Are we prepared? Are we tooled up? Do we have the equipment and the know-how, really, if it was to come to a direct confrontation with Russia?
I think we have the technical ability and the know-how. Whether we're ready or not, it's a different argument, in my view. I've been lucky enough to travel now this last year, talking to different militaries, and from what I've seen, there's still a blasé attitude to it. I mean, it's not just what you're looking at about equipment and infantry and big amounts of people fighting on the front lines, but you're talking about espionage, and you're talking about cyber wars, and you're talking about, you know, can I trust a person in the country I'm working with? One of the very big things I talk about now is when I was in captivity, one of the Western prisoners I was in with came into the cell after he'd just been interrogated, really, really hyped up and worried. And I said, what happened? And he said, they just showed me a picture of my parents in the UK, and they took it from a moving car while they were walking the dog. Now, where'd you go with that? Are you going to talk down a guy in prison that he's then worried about his parents? But then on the bigger picture, there's active service units, Russian sympathizers, and talking to militaries around the world about that, about, you know, having some security on your social media. And I talk about the things I did wrong. You know, it's all well and good. I think they do very well. The NATO will do very well with the combined arms and how they're preparing. Should Russia overstep the mark and start attacking NATO countries, I think they will do very well. But the cyber wars and the personal security, my God, I still think you know, these NATO countries, European countries, are still blasé. That one country put me in a hotel full of high-ranking officers, and I talked to them afterwards about it. When you realise that if this was Ukraine, this place would be blown up tomorrow, you know. And if I know about it, everybody else is going to, including the village, knows about it. So, you know, there is this blasé attitude, and the army tells you not to set patterns, but it's the worst at it. And in my view, and you know, even when I was in prisons, you know, you can confirm that by listening for the guard changes that are rigorously at the same time every day in any army in the entire world. You know, 8 o'clock in the day, the guard changes over. It's done that every day. So you know, certainly my military background helped me when I was in captivity and understanding the military for 9 years, because I spent 9 years fighting Russians or learning how to fight Russians. So you know, I know how good NATO is, but there are some elements that they really strike me as blasé, and our British forces are severely undermanned compared, you know, from what I've seen in Ukraine, very undermanned. I mean, what, we've got 70,000, 80,000 active service guys. I mean, they're talking 500,000 army here. You know, all right, you can rely on Trident, but really nobody's looking at reservists and thinking, if it all goes pear-shaped, who have we got? Maybe they are, maybe they are. I don't know. But I certainly don't get that, you know, feeling when I go and talk to some countries. Some countries like Poland are making inroads into, you know, defence and upping their budgets considerably, and you can see that, and some NATO countries. But when I go back to England, it's seems a bit of a letdown at the moment.
Well, that was the first sort of I guess shock impression that I got was landing in Rzeszów airport in Poland and seeing Patriot missile batteries lining the runway, and then you think like, okay, well, they're taking it quite seriously.
For sure, yeah. Well,
And
we were talking about
yeah.
off air just before. Sorry, we were just talking
Yeah.
about off air about how I've had to move home.
Mm.
And when I'd gone out, my wife had got an apartment in Dnipro, who was very proud, and she's done so well from me being in captivity, holding down a job, moving two cats, finding a new home. She'd done an amazing job dealing with the media and the hype because I was captured. And she was very proud of this, but we were stuck right near the bridge that crosses the Dnipro River, and we've just had to move because the medical centre rattled the windows, and that I got a picture of a mushroom cloud the other side of the river from my front room, and I was thinking, oh, that's a bit close. And then the apartment blocks in January, which was high profile. That was maybe 700 meters down the road on the same street we lived at. And then while we were in bed one night, we had a Russian missile coming down the river, and I was just thinking, as it was coming past, and I said, "Did you hear that?" And my wife's awake. She went, "Yeah." So that's it. We're moving. So we've moved into quite a rural area, but you have to be serious about this because Russians really don't care what they hit, and I don't doubt they're trying to hit military targets, but they're not really bothered if they hit a civilian building or anything else. And Kherson's a testament to that. They're just firing into the village and into the civilian areas. It doesn't matter. So you have to be serious about this. Part of what I do with the talk is talking about this. Drones, the use of drones. How many drones? I mean, on the front lines, the technology when the invasion just went up, it wasn't DPR and separatists anymore. You had fast-moving drones, wingtip drones, Lancet drones. You had Shahed drones. You had different recon drones, and the recon drones were flying 10 feet into our compound and just looking through windows, trying to find to see what was about. So, I talked to armies about that too, and you don't realise that I was on my position, elevated on an embankment in Illichar Steelworks. And I look round and my friend says, look, and there's a Russian drone just came into the compound 10 feet above the ground, was looking in through doors and windows. And I mean, when I joined the army, we didn't even have mobile phones when I joined the army. So, these technical advances, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with all these drones now? Small amounts of money taking out $1 million equipment. It's a new facet for me, and modern day armies and NATO armies have got to deal with it.
And let's turn to that period just before you're captured then. Mariupol, I mean, first of all, it's difficult to get out of there. And I've spoken to a lot of refugees from Mariupol, Dnipro, and around, and Kharkiv, who are in the UK. And there are absolutely harrowing stories of people getting out of the city, many of whom, as you say, didn't think it was going to sort of kick off in the way it did. And then when it did, a lot thought they would be safer by staying put. But of course, there was no safe place. I mean, a lot of those people who are on the move were targeted as well. So your family managed to get out safely. And you're stuck there.
Some are still there, unfortunately. Yeah, so I won't go too much into detail. But yeah, my wife's side of my family, and they're very old, so they couldn't get out. So they're still there.
That's incredibly tough as well. We know that the cruelty and the randomness of the violence. We also hear that unless you renounce everything Ukrainian and even accept Russian passports, then you're now potentially being denied access to medical care. So
Yeah.
it's absolutely horrific to hear that. But you're there, you're fighting not just in a land somewhere far away. You're fighting in your hometown for streets you're familiar with, landmarks, your memories in that place, and here are the Russians erasing it physically. Obviously, you're only fighting for a couple of months before you're captured. But what was the sort of intensity of that like? Does anything in your experience in Northern Ireland and Bosnia prepare you for that?
Well, like I said, it was my fourth tour, and we were actually deployed December the 12th, 2021. So we were there 3 months before the full-scale invasion. I'd fought in Novolugansk, I'd fought in Persky, and I'd fought in Pavlopol the year before, and I was a commander the year before. So it wasn't new to me. I'd been promoted to section commander within the Ukrainian military, which was unheard of. I was the first Westerner to command a position in 2021, which really was quite new to the Ukrainian military. Even the politicians from Rada came down to the position to see the English guy managing the position, which was like they didn't really understand. And my commanding officer said, "Yeah, he's fine, and he's doing really well." And then I became the first really to pass all aspects of parachuting with the Marines. So I wasn't a mercenary. I was there committed to the military. I'd been out there for 5 years. So I did 9 jumps, 4 of them combat jumps with all your gear. And then I passed the Berry test as well. So all those things really challenged that war tourist. And the Ukrainians are very good at spotting those sorts of guys now. So it took me a year to really integrate, a year and a half to integrate, to go through all those tests that the boys were going through. Even though I had my military accreditations from the British Army, they still put me through my marksman in Desna and Kiev. Maybe go through and get certified as a Ukrainian Marine rather than just take my word for it, which I was very happy to do. But I was doing it with the boys, so you become integrated, and they become your friends, and you're not there as a war. And when I married Larissa, learning language, all the doors really opened up for me here, and they became home. And I think the nature of the world now is that people find homes in the most unlikeliest places, and probably where they're not born. It's normal now. For to get that mercenary brand was quite upsetting for me because Russia had had my contracts. We were told quite early doors that they were supplied to Russia, who decided to ignore it. Who then, when they brought the Americans to the prison, when they captured them, it was quite clear they weren't captured even in Donbass. They were bringing all Westerners to this facility, and going with this same narrative that they're mercenaries, MI6, SAS. And when I was interrogated, that's what happened really. Is most of the interrogations hadn't moved on from my survival, escape, resisted, evade training 30 years before. It was still very much the same playbook. So when it was quite easy for me to then slip back in and try and remember from my courses 30 years before what I needed to do. Don't shit on your mates, delay information. If you're going to make a cover story, get it close to the truth as you can. I didn't have one when I went in, but the Russians manufactured one for me. So all that experience when I was captured as well, I found it in prison that I was, the only one that had any training. Where he was caught with 2 NGOs, a civilian, American civilian, guys that had been in the army but not gone into depth as much as myself, because I'd been working with my recon unit in my battalion. I'd done overt and covert surveillance counter-terrorism operations in Northern Ireland for 3 years, and I was working with COP, covert operations platoon. And then I had my Bosnia. I went twice to Bosnia, part of 2-4 Air Mobile, where I went to America to do my SEER training and my conduct after capture training as part of my role with 2-4 Air Mobile. So even in prison, I couldn't talk about what I'd done to my colleagues in prison because, one, they would interrogate the guys in your cell with you to try and get information about you. So it was a no-no to even really discuss what I'd done in the military before and my role in Ukraine with my colleagues in prison. So it did give me a help, and obviously I learned in the culture. I'd seen that war. My first tour was my first trip to Pesky was very illuminating in Pesky in 2018 because it was my first experience of really a tank round hitting you, and that velocity and that short time span. It's not like a mortar. Artillery, I would say, is bearable if you know it's coming in and you're getting down to cover. It's not nice, but generally you're just you're praying to the gods you get through it. But when you hit a tank round, it's so instantaneous. You hear boom, and it hits the ground in front of you with such force. And I remember that always, enough that it killed a few of my colleagues in Novolegansk. So that, and then my first experience of grad in the invasion. Now, I'd never been graded before, and I referred to it in the book as Phil Collins. It comes in, you can hear it shoot off in the distance. If you're lucky to hear it shoot off at night, it's easier to track because if you can see the burners on the rockets, then it's either going left or right. If you just hear the noise, it's coming for you. So you can't see those burners. And when it comes in, it's like the drumbeat of Phil Collins. You just shout and grad. You get into your dried out river, dried out well that I was in, and just wait, and it just comes in. Boom, 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 boom. And if you have two cassettes firing, it's even more volatile, and it's just shrapnel winging around everywhere. So you really get used to the inoculation. And my boss was sort of saying, "This your first grad?" And yeah, he said, "Man, we've got to keep doing this grad CrossFit every day." He kept saying, we've got to get 15 times a day. It'll be grad, essentially calls grad, and then you're into the underground cellar or dried up well or somewhere where you can get some serious cover and just wait for this grad to come in. But yeah, I mean, inoculation is a big part of what I talk about as well. The inoculation to, it was my first time where I hadn't had the air superiority. We were now Taliban. We were now the guys in sandals. So when Russia had full air superiority, all we had was a few Soviet Igloos that weren't doing the job. The pilot would throw on his afterburner and he was gone. Throw out some chaff, he was gone. We hit one plane in a whole 7 weeks while I was there, and we saw it spin out into the Azov Sea. I think the pilot must have been eating his packed lunch or something, or but it was very to watch. We had 8 years to prepare for the invasion. So when we didn't have any food from the early onset and the rockets weren't doing the job with the planes, I remember texting Richard Kemp saying, he's saying, "What do you need? What's going on? What's happening?" And Colonel Richard Kemp was my former CO, and now on the media, the Times, Telegraph, he writes for former commander of Afghan forces. And I just said, we need man pads. We're just getting smashed. We were hiding our BTR in garages to disguise the thermal, breaking into garages on the way back through from the front lines. Things like that to reduce the risk to the soldiers. But yeah, I mean, nothing can prepare you for that. It took me 6 or 7 days to really get used to it. And it's strange how quick you really do get used to it. Once you get inoculated very quickly about rockets and the noise of the battlefield, and we had good guys on the radio warning us of planes coming in or, artillery or, and that was constant all the way through. That's how we lasted really 7 weeks encircled and trying to defend Mariupol.
And for those, for instance, who find themselves at the latter stages of the war here in Bakhmut and Avdiivka, Solidar and places like that, they're subject to another terrifying Russian phenomenon, which is the so-called human meat wave attack. Now, I think everyone is now familiar with the sheer callousness with which Russians treat their conscripts, with which, of course, they treat also those who are drafted from Donbass. Russian-speaking Ukrainians are, by all accounts, treated with absolute contempt and suspicion. What must it be like to be experiencing that, where essentially there are wave upon wave people coming at you? And as a soldier there, you're just sort of firing maybe for hours or days on end. That must be not just physically but also psychologically very wearing.
It is. We had that in Mariupol. The degree of training for Russian troops was varied. The guys coming in on the Azov Sea and into the port and coming off the coast generally were a better standard of troops. And you hear the stories from my colleagues who talk about guys that didn't seem to, they had rifles that didn't make noises, was one guy that said, and the standard just kept coming, but they were very well trained compared to DPR forces that were attacking my segment of Ilocha. Didn't have the basic knowledge of infantry skills. 2 weeks in, we lost one guy, Ivanov, because they tried to breach our defenses. And we got in a firefight with them, and there was about 8 guys. And we had we were guarding the main H20 route in from Donetsk to Mariupol, and parallel in that was a railway track, and in the middle was a stripwood. There wasn't any other way to approach us really, other than this stripwood. So they came in with 8 guys, got whacked. We let them get 30 meters. The radios tell us again that there's 2 van loads of guys coming now. They come down the stripwood, maybe 600 or 700 meters down this stripwood from an area which we can't hit, which is behind a berm. But they come down again. We whack them when they get 30 meters, and then they come back with 2 or 3 more loads. And you're just thinking, this is just crazy. They've got no baseline support, no mortars, no artillery cover. They're just pumping people into these positions and just getting whacked, and then they're just retreating back, injured and killed, and then coming back in. I mean, it becomes a turkey shoot. What really scared me then was they stopped doing that and then brought in the mortars. I mean, it was so. But even the mortars were badly trained. I talked to one podcast and said they were quite content on firing mortars into our embankment in front of our position. I thought, this is going to cut us to shreds, that it's over. But they were quite content of bombing the same position, for 5 hours, and change it. And just the rounds were coming into this one spot. And I was thinking, they're not even bracketing or pushing in or anything. Who are these guys just going through the motions of just firing mortars at us, but quite content on hitting the embankment in front of us, not really pushing any further. So they're solely reliant in Mariupol on artillery and air power and mortars to an extent, but mobile artillery, SAUs, and eventually you just get smashed so much that then they send in these poorly trained infantry guys in numbers. And by the end of Mariupol, we were encircled. They were maybe 30 meters other side of walls. We could hear them talking. They'd taken up positions that we formerly held. We'd had a battalion, the 501st, really surrender. They went down from 600 people to 140 people, running out of ammunition. And, it was all, and they were coming in through that gap where they surrendered. And it was just, the position became untenable, and we had no food, no water. We were struggling to get logistics in, and then we were running out of ammo. And that's when Zelensky called it around sort of 11th, or my platoon commander called it. I wasn't aware of any of that was going on outside of what was happening in Mariupol, and just said, we're going to call it, we're going to try and get out.
And unfortunately, you didn't. I mean, let's turn to that, to your capture, and then,
Thanks.
of course, the interrogation. I mean, this is the bit which I'm tentative to try and sort of drill into that, because, of course, there are some extremely unpleasant details. But did you get the impression that the Russians were interrogating you to get some kind of intelligence, or out of simply going through the motions, cruelty, etc.? Or are they trying to get some kind of propagandistic story that they can spin? What was your impression of the interrogation process?
Well, when we called time, we got ambushed. I got 2 hours outside of Mariupol and escaping invasion. It was nighttime, 3 in the morning when we went, and it was one of the best days that I'd seen all year. It was sunny. The day before it was foggy, perfect time to get out. And, you know, that day particularly, it was blue skies, sun was out. I was thinking the world's against us here, you know. But I felt confident I could make it back. And because we got ambushed, the platoon got split up. I was looking at initially going 130 kilometers to assist a battalion who was fighting the Russians on the Azov Sea. And it was always part of my planning before we left to eat a last meal. If we did get cornered, to try and find Russians to surrender. We none of us wanted to be captured by the DPR. We thought it'd be better to be captured by the Russians. And then really 2 hours outside Mariupol, I was trying to escape and evade, get back to Zaporizhia to friendly lines. Out of the whole brigade, I know of 12 of our guys that made it, 2 of them women medics, who got over 250 kilometers back to friendly lines, emaciated by the end of it. But I was captured, well, really about 2 hours outside by the DPR, the Next People's Republic, trying to get back to friendly lines once the decision was made we had to go. Initially on the capture, it wasn't too bad. I'd planned and said in my best Russian that I'm English, and I would repeat it in English because during the capture, you know you're not going to get through a filter process because my Russian's okay, but I still talk with a Cockney accent. You know, they're going to pick me up straight away. And what also I had a lot of what we call Gucci gear, good gear on me, which most Ukrainians didn't have. So automatically that put me in, who are you? You know, I'd got a Garmin and a buffalo fleece and lower boots. And, you know, most Ukrainians can't afford all that stuff. Cargo belts, really good, you know, MTPs, Pixel that we bought, civilian Pixel. So, you know, I knew I wasn't going to get through the filter process. But I thought if I just say I'm English, it might get them on the back foot because if they thought I was at Azov, they'd probably shoot me on the front line, and that's historically what they did. First of all, they stripped me down looking for far right tattoos, and then they will shoot you in a parking lot, you know, on the front line. So I was keen to, a part of me understanding the culture helped me with making those decisions straight away, understanding what had gone on historically, living out there for so long, understanding that situation. And my only problem was when I was captured, that I was captured by really young guys. I referred to in the book as in-betweeners. You know, it was literally, they looked very bad. My pride took a bit of a battering, but yeah, you know, World War II helmets and stripy T-shirts and rigs that looked like they were from Toys R Us. And my pet hate is, you know, wearing 2 sets of different types of camouflage. But these guys take it to a whole new level. You know, they've got like 3 or 4, you know, hats one and trousers one and a jacket another. And I was just thinking, man, I've just been caught by these guys. I'm never going to live this down. But when I was captured, it wasn't too bad. But they handed me over to some Russians. How do I know the Russians? Well, they were in full Russian fatigues. They didn't look like the guys that captured me. They had different tape on. DPR had white tape on. These guys had different tape on, red tape. They had fast helmets. They had all the Gucci gear. And they promptly stabbed me in the leg. Asked me a few basic questions about whether I was a MI6 or SAS. Do you speak Russian? I said, not really, no. And they weren't really interested. They didn't give me any tactical questioning that was significant, other than they took me 40 minutes to what I referred to as a tiled floored room, which I'd been on enough security briefs in Bosnia and places that, you know, somebody said to me once, if you find yourself in this house, the chances of you getting out are going to be pretty slim. So I'd had these sorts of training with SEER in America, and so I was aware that the place I was in, you know, it was a tiled floor with a drainage hole. You know, I got a quick look around. It was a bodged up office. There was no toilets or sinks or anything. It was just clearly a place where they beat the shit out of people, and you know, it was easy to clean up the blood and the mess. So I knew exactly where I was. But before I'd even said a word, they put paddles onto my little fingers and electrocuted me. And then the questions started, and the tactical questions were really the same again. You're MI6, who are you? But they were initially looking at my social media profile. So there was a guy on a laptop constantly looking at my Facebook, Instagram, where I'd been, what I'd done. who I talked to. I didn't have my phone. I managed to ditch my phone before I was captured, so I didn't have to worry about that too much. But I, things I'd made some rookie mistakes, like left my wife's business card in a pouch in my wallet, but I knew she was safe. Aidan Aslin, another Brit that was captured with me, had sent me a post-it note saying, "Your wife's safe. She's got back in with my girlfriend. They've gone into Kiev, towards Kiev." And, he sent me a nice little message on the other side of it saying, "We're, fucked," basically, with a nice little smiley emoji. So I knew they were safe. And that was quite a big reassurance. I thanked in their end for that. And so I knew she was safe, but the fact that she had my wife's email details and the work where she worked really did sort of upset me, and it was quite a rookie mistake. And another thing was that when I didn't have my phone and I sort of said I don't have a phone, it was blown off me when I was hit by an IED, train IED, and it didn't work. He promptly pulled out the battery charger I'd brought with me and went, "So why do you have this battery charger dangling in front of me?" And then I get another round of electric shocks, and I'm saying, "Look, I have to stick to my guns and just say, I haven't got it. It blown off. I don't have a phone, but I took my iPods with me for some reason. I don't know why, but I took them with me. It was really obscure, and the tactical questioning was very bad. Other than the fact there was a guy in there who was probably FSB or some sort of intelligence who was doing all the data collecting, who told pretty much after I was electrocuted 3 or 4 times, showed me the video of me being electrocuted. So I know there's a video out there of me draped to the Ukrainian flag being electrocuted. So he showed me that. And he also showed me a video he sent to my a picture he sent to my parents with deceased, and he just said, "You're dead on the internet," with my copy of my passport. So they were already sort of going onto the social media saying, "We've caught him, we've killed him," this sort of stuff, which I could understand what was going on around me. They were saying that somebody else wanted me, and I wasn't sure where, but I knew I was going to be moved on. So for me, the fact that I was on social media, you can look at 2 ways. I was quite happy that I was out there, that people knew that even though they might think I'm dead, I'm out there. They know they've got me. So it starts with those small victories. And then one of the cards alluded to the fact that we would get 10 people for you, and our general back, which again was another indication quite early on, not long after I was captured, that they were looking to get a general back. So again, it's the small victories, and I started to build hope around that. But it was a very bad, I thought I was going to die. They did a mock execution. I thought, if it's going to go, we're going to go now. But I thought, providing that I didn't die of a heart attack through the electric shocks, I knew I was going to be moved on. And that's when I got went to the black site and then got some nice treatment, which is good cop, bad cop. And they'd stabbed me in the leg by then, and I got a 3-inch knife wound in my leg. Just they didn't want me running anywhere, so they stabbed me in the leg. So I was in a really bad state when I got to the black site, and that's when I met Mr. Balaclava, who was, told me that if I would find discomfort here, but I'd be okay, and we'll give you a meal. And they put me in an isolation cell, which is like a 1 meter by 3 meter cell, with a camera on it. So the camera's on you full time. There's no window. You have a buzzer to put you to sleep and a buzzer to wake you up, maybe 6, 10 o'clock at night. And your door, your food comes in initially when you get there, through an open door. It looked newly built cells. It smelt new paint. So I was there maybe in an isolation cell for about 48 hours and only asked to fill in an autobiography. And when I'd left the bit about being an instructor with National Guard, they told me I wasn't going to eat anymore. Maybe I'll get some bread. And then for 50 days in the black site, I was starved, and all I had was bread. So there's a good timeline of when I was captured that we've got now, that where I look reasonably okay when I'm captured, I've got hair, to when in June, 50, 60 days later, I was down to 60 kilo, looking like I'd been in a Japanese war camp. which really that those pictures went global because we weren't being fed and nobody was being fed. So you know, the guy I was in the cell with when I did get out of isolation cell finally. There's two things. One, I spoke to him. He'd been in there 30 days longer than me. He looked like crap. So he was a guide, a guinea pig of what I could look like in 30 days. And he looked thin as hell, white, pale. Your skin goes like crepe paper. Your nails go thin. You can feel a lump where the last bit of food you had was. And then after 2 or 3 months, it just goes so thin. You've got that lump you're constantly rubbing where you're thinking, that's the last meal I had. You know, you're not showered, you're not brushing teeth, you're not giving anything like that. So you've got that yeast and you're looking like really bad after 2 months, really struggling to keep your dignity. And it was only about 2 months later where I had a hair, you know, it's my first shower in the prison, which I write about. And about 3 weeks in, they cut off all my hair as well. So we have a good timeline of what I looked like before until the trial. And by the time I got to the trial, I thought I was going to die of starvation long before I'd ever get exchanged because it was that bad.
And that's extraordinary, isn't it? Because you start to get a sense that you may be of some value, and that gives you some hope. Then, of course, they put you on. Then they threaten execution, and that made global headlines. And that was an extraordinary moment where you realize that, you know, essentially you're dealing with terrorists who have no concern for any human rights conventions whatsoever. But it sounds like they really pushed it to the edge. Now, there's no strategic or tactical reason for doing that. Dare I say it, this just sounds like sort of blatant cruelty and revenge.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the situation I talk about on social media now is the systematic torture. You know, people going about war crimes. War crimes go on both sides. Unfortunately, it's the nature of war. There are some opportunist people that want to enrich themselves from war. There are accidents that happen, but the difference between Russia being just, you know, conducting, you know, accidents and small amount of war crimes, it's the systematic torture driven from the highest levels of the Kremlin. You'll hear, my profile is large because I'm British. But there's quite a lot of me. There are lots of stories, and even worse stories about what happens, you know, to the captured prisoners. And you only have to see the recent charade that Russia's just posted prisoners of war, and they've moved them to Rostov-Don and given them 20 years in prison because what? They were part of National Guard, and that's of fighting in their own country, defending their own lands. You know, and it's that when they look skeletal and there's 20 of them looking like they've not been fed, it's really worrying 2 years later whether any of them are alive. And Russia doesn't allow any humanitarian aid groups or inspectors or into the prisons because of the systematic torture that people are under. And that's the difference between a war criminal like Putin and serious war crimes like ethnic cleansing and genocide. And that's the difference which I talk to people now. It's that systematic torture. You know, I've just been and done a charity event with John Sweeney, and one of the guys there was one of the women there was a photographer, and she takes pictures of the injured POWs that are exchanged, or the civilians, and the horror stories and the scars that these civilians and soldiers get. And you know, they're quite happy to put the sign of the swastika in on someone's back or forehead, or, you know, and that's what's going on. Not to mention the rape and everything else that's happening once they take over these areas. So, you know, we try and talk about that now and raise the profile of that it is systematic. And I'm one of quite a few now that have been captured, been tortured, and you hear the same equipment. That's not because people are copying each other. So many people, because it's systematic. It's because they're using the same equipment that their, you know, colleagues in another department using. Tapic phones, they jimmy rig them in a basement, and you can use them to electrocute people. Then they're just normal field phones. Dylan, who was captured with, was waterboarded, and in some sort of contraption that when he didn't give an answer that they wanted, the water level rose, and he couldn't get his head out. So until he was bubbling underwater. We had another Ukrainian guy where they electrocuted, they put ball clips on his testicles. I mean, it's normal to Russians, and it's systematic, and it's that makes Putin that I agree with. Is that he should be dragged into the courts of the ICC because he's a wanted war criminal, and that's the difference between, let's say, Ukraine or hit in an area that Russians are pulling back from, that they're hiding in the civilian areas. So quite common. That's quite a common thing. I would say that's both sides do that to a degree. When does a school not become a school? When all the people are out of it and the Russians are in it, and then soldiers are in it. It's that, and then the Russians were then, but they've just hit a school where your soldiers are in it, and they were all dotted around our prison in Makivka. The artillery, they were using the prisoners as human shields, so we could see from our prison windows all the dotted artillery pieces, and we could hear the mortars firing from by the side of the prison. So and the rounds from Ukraine were coming into the prison, which was really strange because then we realised it was like 4 kilometres away, and the rounds were coming in from. They must have been coming out of Adivka. So we realised then quite quickly that the Ukraine wasn't far away. But in those initial time I was captured, I didn't even know there was a Ukraine until Paul Yuri came in and spoke to us. So the information then comes in about where we stand, and Paul Yuri sort of stuck his head over the wall. It took me about a week to really pluck up the courage to talk to Paul, and I said, "You all right, mate? How's it going? I hear you English." He went, "Yeah. Who's that?" And I said, "Shaun." He went, Shaun Pinner." And I went, "Yeah." And he went, "Oh, I am fucked." And that was what he said when I first saw him. He was like through a hole in the wall we could speak, and he went, "I've just seen you on the news." And I was quickly then saying, "What did you see? What did you see?" He said, "Your mum's talking on the news." So we start to develop these news, debriefing people, new prisoners that come in, and getting this information to try and give ourselves a picture. And over months and months and months, we started to get more confident, even after the trial. And we started to build that defense and start reminiscent of The Great Escape. I was a big fan of those war films with my granddad when I was a kid. So, we started to hatch these O groups and meetings where we would get information, collate information, work out what's going on in the world. And that's where really what the crux of the book's about. After 8 months of all that, we still had the fight in us, towards the very end. As much as we could, we weren't going to go down fighting, even though they were telling us that we were going to be shot.
And this systematic torture, there must be, manuals, training, equipment. You're talking here about a certain level of standardization for this torture infrastructure. In your view, does this give the lie to the idea that this is Putin's war, a war of the elite? Because, if you have all this stuff going on, it's really the war of many tens and tens of thousands of people inflicting just the torture camps alone. And then you expand that out to the many hundreds of thousands who enable it, produce the equipment, supply it, work in administration. So what's your view on the broader culpability of the Russian people?
Well, it's a difficult one. I mean, Putin's got a stranglehold on the media. RT were constantly interrogating us. We weren't given a choice. Russia Today, the media outlet. Shortly after I was electrocuted on the ears, they came in and I had an interview made to do an interview with Roman Kazarov, the RT presenter, and we were able to ping those people when we got released. But also, various other RT people were coming in, and they had access to an FSB MGB prison. I mean, Aidan Aslin was interviewed by Graham Phillips, a Brit. How has he got access to an FSB and MGB prison? Because he knows them all, and it's one of the most harshest watches you'll ever see. If you're a journalist, I mean, that's how not to do it. And for him to interview Aidan Aslin, it's one of the most uncomfortable views because he's been stabbed, electrocuted, beaten, actually, I don't know if he's electrocuted, but he was stabbed and beaten. So the guy's scared and captured. He is in handcuffs, being interviewed by Graham Phillips. That's what we had to deal with daily. And my interviews and his interviews, we were used for propaganda quite early on. So going back to your point, Putin has a real grasp on the media. And also, you only have to see the standard of troops that he's using to fight against the troops that are actually there to control the masses. They are vastly more tactical equipment than even the guys going in on the front lines. So it shows you that Putin's fear is at home, not external. It's Moscow, and and I just wrote about it yesterday about Prigozhin's. I'm just reading a new book actually, and Prigozhin's coup. He got quite far into Russia, and there were people wanting to take pictures of him, and he'd basically gone 200 kilometers into Russia to take out Moscow, and nobody really, it went unchallenged pretty much. That still hasn't gone away. That's left a big crack. And as much as they try and paper over it, Putin tries to paper over it, it's still going on. You've got Igor Girkin now wanting to run for presidency. Now he's a culprit and one of the organisers of the 2014 separatist uprising in Ukraine. But he's in prison. But you can look at it two ways. He probably understands Russian culture better than most. And he's now probably seeing a gap in the market because people are, if you read between the lines, are unhappy with the mobilization, the call-ups, and Russia are struggling. Sanctions are hitting because even when I was in, they were complaining about the price of food and cigarettes. It's all going up. There's a shortage of rubber. The aircraft industry is at a standstill. So Putin's, if we keep pushing, Putin's going to be really trying to deal with the problems at home. He probably is now, but it's just the social media and portray Putin as this sort of hero. Was a year ahead of any of us, all NATO and European countries with that. And he's got a fan base, the religious connection between, Russia and America, which basically is against the, LGBT rights and that they've got a link. So there is an affinity with what Russia's pumping out with some of the Bible belts of, America and Trump land. He's capitalizing on that. And most of my hate mail comes from Americans. And you can tell by the way they're written that they're Americans writing it. And still to this day, if I don't get a message coming in saying we should have killed you when we had you in the nest, and using American colloquialisms and grammar, and you just think, my God, there's a real problem with this. Yeah, I mean, it's Russia. Russia is a difficult country in respects to. I mean, Ukraine was never going to conquer it. It was always an unjust war and a war to get the old Soviet Union back, which now, if you look at it, looking inside, looking out, looking in, you've now got Russia with an extended NATO border. I mean, it's a massive. It's one of the biggest cock-ups, foreign cock-ups in history. I mean, he's increased NATO's border with Russia. Is now a military economy. They're going to be struggling. It's inflating GDP, and Russia are really struggling. But they keep pushing that. They've got a big fan base on social media, and they keep pushing this. Everything's going to be okay, but it's not. It's only we don't push this enough in the West. We don't talk about these things on social media in the West, which is why since I've been released, we've now, myself and Aidan and a few others, we're now quite vocal on social media. I never really dealt with social media much while I was in. I was a soldier, really didn't push. I had 30 followers on Twitter. Now we got 15,000 followers, and we're pushing that. Hold on a minute, we live here. We can combat those Graham Phillips. We actually lived in Ukraine. This guy is just paid by Russia. We actually lived in Mariupol. So now I talk about what it was actually like in Mariupol and Donbass, and who fueled it, and why the FSB has jailed all the ringleaders and anybody associated, killed and jailed. All of them that wanted a free republic of Donetsk People's Republic, Lugansk People's Republic. So, for me, it's about exposing those flaws. It was always a Russian invasion. In 2014, Vice News did great episodes about showing the Russian army that was in Ukraine. It's always been a Russian invasion. And I was in prison with a former transport minister of the DPR, who I write about in the book, who wanted a republic, not under Russia, which is why you now have a lot of the leaders of that republic that initially what some of them wanted, now in prison or dead. And Igor Girkin being the last one of them, really, who's now in an FSB prison. So, it's just we're able to pump that message back out now, because we're probably myself. I'm probably one of a handful of people that have lived in Donbass before the invasion, who really understands what it's like and the culture. So I've sort of fallen into this area, like talking to you about what it was actually like in Mariupol, those false narratives that are being pumped out. It's nothing I planned. It's just where I've ended up. And now we're actually taking Russia to court as well in the UK, trying to get a landmark case. So that if we win, that we were able to get money for people affected by the war in Ukraine, with using money from Russian assets that we've seized. So that's now. So, I never would fight again. My military career is over. I'm still suffering from injuries from my capture, but my life's taken on a whole new meaning. Trying to make things right in Ukraine, trying to get back Mariupol, supporting with humanitarian aid, raising the profile and taking Russia to court, and trying to get money for people affected by the war.
I think it's very powerful, and I've been following what we've been saying there. There are other guys like Mesa Gifford who are still like on the front line, but also leveraging social media incredibly effectively to try and get the truth out there. And that's why I've got so many Ukrainians on this channel. It seems to me that having these first-hand stories, people who are actually there saying, this is the Russian lie, and this is the truth, and I've seen it and experienced it, I think that is so important to get across, especially the period now where we started the interview talking about the dearth of stories about Ukraine, in-depth stories about Ukraine on the main media. The kind of area I wanted to end up, though, with, as I always try to end on talking about Ukraine, because Russia takes up all the oxygen, and
yeah,
especially it's so traumatized and attention-seeking. You've written very eloquently about the differences between Ukraine and Russia. So could you, we've heard a lot about the Russian cruelty as you've experienced it. In your view, what are the characteristics of Ukraine and Ukrainians that have enabled them to resist this huge scale invasion and retain their language, identity, and of course this fierceness with which they are protecting their land and culture? What's your impression of Ukrainians, and why is it so important for them to not just persevere but be victorious?
Well, it comes a number of explanations, really. We've got to look at it prior to the invasion. The wearing of the Vyshyvanka shirts was quite a one I noticed when I came back. Really, when I was in Ukraine before the invasion, they were brought out on special occasions, and people were proud to wear them, and you quite occasionally you see them in the street. Post-invasion, now everybody's wearing them. I mean, they're everywhere. The beautiful shirts, embroidered shirts, and people wear them to work. And you go down the street, and there's lots of T-shirts saying, "F Russia," and hoodies around with "Get Lost Putin," and people have come out of the shadows of Russia since the invasion. So that's probably a good thing I've seen. And the language says a resurgence. There isn't discrimination in Ukraine. I live in Dnipro. We speak Russian, and also I'm a Brit. So if I can only speak Russian, generally we speak Russian. There isn't discrimination that I've seen anywhere in Ukraine that discriminates Russian speakers. And our president's a Russian speaker, so he speaks Russian. So it's that's the re-emergence of the Ukrainian language. I don't like speaking Russian now, and a lot of people don't like speaking. There's a difference. You're not persecuted, but people now want to learn Ukrainian, and we talk Ukrainian, and I'm trying to pick up Ukrainian. That's not because there's discrimination in Russians. That's because we want to talk Ukrainian now because of what Russia's done. So there's a big wedge that Russia's, by invading, has caused now between its neighbour. And that's permanent. That's never going to go, because you only have to walk around Kiev and Dnipro and Lviv, and you see the hatred for Russia, absolute hatred that somebody could do this. But in Ukraine, it's beautiful. At the moment, we've got snow, and even the winter's beautiful here. We've got snow the last couple of days. It gets to -30 in the trench lines. I go out there every day and still think about my time and my 4 tours and what it's like to work in the trenches when it's cold, wet, freezing, and my heart still goes out to the troops. While there's a will to fight, I think I don't see any change in that. Not in the cities essentially, but there's still the will to fight and the hatred for what Russia's done. There's quite a misconception that people are tired. There's difference. We've been fighting for nearly 2 years, so people are tired and fed up with it. But most of that is taken up with anger. But I don't see any deterioration in the will to fight. People still want to. You see a lot of misinformation on social media saying, "Oh, Ukraine's this, Ukraine's that." Ukraine's just hiring women out, plugging them into the gaps. No, a lot of the women feel an obligation to defend their homelands and their country. But I certainly don't see a decline in the will to fight. On the contrary, people are still angry, want to fight. We don't have enough ammunition. That's pretty much, we need more ammunition and more help from the West. We got F-16s on the way. I think Germany's just decided it wants to send us Leopard 1s, which is great. And people went, "Oh, Leopard 1s is crap." And I'm like, well, Russia are using T-54s, 55s.
I was going to say, yeah, against T-55s, that's not so bad, is it?
Yeah, beggars can't be choosers. So it has a purpose. And, I was like, to Germany and, Germany's and America, and Britain's just been over this week, and the support's there. The weapons need to get in quicker and faster because we want the guys to be able to do the job. If we'd had F-16 6 months or the early summer, then you could be looking at a different counteroffensive. And America's spending 5% of its budget. One of the misconceptions of that they're spending billions. They are, but it is only 5% of the defense budget of America that's taking out their adversary. And to comment a politician, that sounds a great deal, because they're going to take over Europe. They're going to move into and build relationships with South America and Cuba and places like that. And then, if you don't stop them here, they're just going to move even closer to America. What are you going to do? Wait till they get on the doorstep before you start, defending America. So it's vital America still has a part to play in Ukraine. And Ukraine are very thankful for the support of the world. I mean, they're constantly telling people. I mean, Zelensky got persecuted recently for not doing enough politically to say thank you. But generally, you see on social media, and you go on there and you look at what Ukraine is, but they're forever grateful. Most of them are now working in Europe and coming back to Ukraine because they feel safer, that the military is doing a good job. And you can go to parts of Ukraine that are really not affected by the war. Like, I've just been to the outskirts. I went to the mountains, Carpathians, quite recently, where you wouldn't even know there was a war on. Beautiful. It looks like Austria, and amazing scenery. And so, you can go to places to relax, but, my heart is still trying to support the guys on the front lines, my old unit, new units with equipment, cold weather gear. My wife's a humanitarian, so she deals with the refugees. So we still have an active part in that and keeping the profile going. But Ukraine's just such a beautiful country with beautiful people. It's nothing like Russia portrays it. And also, most of the decisions about Ukraine are made by people that have never even been to Ukraine or Russia. And again, living in other places like America. And, who just really sympathizes to the Russian cause and just really reposting trash, Kremlin trash about Ukraine. So, you know, it is my. I wasn't born here. You could say I was made here, but I'm 50 years old, so I don't know how I can get away with that. But yeah, I certainly fell in love with the country. I didn't really have a real understanding for it. If I'm truly honest, in 2018, I did love that. I loved being here, and I didn't go home for 5 years. But then I just fell in love with the culture. It's a good family ethos in Ukraine, which I fell in love with. You can park at the beach and it's not going to cost you 10, 20 pounds a day. Still got your supermarkets, your grocers, your butchers, your local produce salesmen, as well as your supermarkets. There isn't a speed camera at every junction. There's a lot of freedoms in Ukraine that we're fighting for. You can fish. There's no rod licenses, no bailiffs. Things are cheaper. It's like £1.50 for steak and 30-50p for a beer. It's a lot. The culture is different. It's you work to live, not live to work. So I fell in love with that when I got here. And I love we get the seasons. We get spring, summer, autumn, winter, and it gets bloody cold in the winter. And then I have a celebration day when I take my thermals off in the March. And then we get the first shots of spring, which is nothing better than spring and summer in Ukraine. It's beautiful. So you ask me why people are defending that. They're defending their cultures, their home, because they know if Russia come in, they would just move them to other parts of Russia. Ukraine will be eradicated, and they won't. It will cease to exist. You won't be allowed to speak Ukrainian. You'll have to speak Russian, and basically, we've seen that before in the Second World War. How that turned out is when you try and do that. So, this. It makes me laugh when I hear that Ukraine, we're denazifying Ukraine, when the very people coming in are actually, of that Nazi ilk, and have a bigger problem with far right and, Rushish and all the other paramilitaries, far right paramilitaries are coming into Ukraine. And my common phrase is, what, you're denazifying Ukraine with even more Nazis? Jeez. I've never seen it. Most armies have an element. You know who they are. You don't really talk to them unless you're that sort of ilk. They're everywhere in every culture. There is an extremist in every country, but it's nothing like Russia says it is. It's so far from the truth. And we've got a Jewish president and a Muslim defense minister. So, come on. It's like some of the biggest Jewish communities outside of Israel and America live in Ukraine, Dnipro and Odessa and places like that. So, it's very far from the truth. Everyone's mucking into the war effort here, and that is something to behold.
And without persecution, without threat. I mean, the irony is
Yeah,
the safest place to be a Jew right now is probably Ukraine.
yeah, for sure, because obviously, Russia's allegiance is embracing Hamas, which Hamas wants to really eradicate the Jewish nation and Israel from Palestine. So yeah, where do you go with that? There's a lot of reports of marginalization of ethnic cultures and trying to get the ethnic cultures in Russia recruited. There's plenty of video footage of them now trying to press gang people into service because it's they're not going to get blowbacks from that. It's easier to get those people in and start serving. And what Russia are very clever at is they're taking people from the outskirts. They won't touch people from Moscow. So it's the Moscow elites. It makes me laugh when I hear Americans call America the deep state, because at least we have a democracy. At least you can vote in people. At least you can do things that you want to do and not be told that you have to do this. In Russia, they don't have that liberty. You're told what your place is, where, and so they take people from the outskirts. Moscow is its own little country inside Russia, where it doesn't want to take people and recruit people for this war effort in Ukraine. So, a lot of the extremities of Russia are really struggling to deal with the deaths. 300,000 Russians have lost their lives. They're not paying into the economy anymore. There's a real brain drain in Russia. So, again, I think it affects Russia a lot more being a bigger country. They need this workforce. They need these people. So the longer it goes on, I think Russia are going to suffer with that side of it. But Ukraine now, people are starting to come back. Like I said, the trains are actually full coming back. You have to book like 19 days in advance to get a ticket into Ukraine, otherwise you won't get a seat. So it's good to see that people are coming back and are willing to risk, you know, war and rockets for their country. You know, and you know, BBC, from my opinion, are like so late on doing a documentary about the people avoiding the draft in Ukraine. You're going to get that anyway. You're going to get people trying to get out and don't want to fight, and you're going to get that. But you know, the BBC are like 2 years too late on that. It's you know, it's very bad timing and a bad really report.
And not representative of, you know, putting it in a broader context, where Ukraine's also been announced as the second highest country in the world for charitable donations. It's like, well, which angle, which story are you going to take? And you know, they go for the most negative one, the most you know, you can see how the cogs are working there.
Yeah. Conflict. Journalism, you know, breeds conflict, and you know, conflict sells. But I mean, the BBC are just ridiculous with their reporting at the moment, in my view. Not because I'm anti-BBC, but just, you know, bringing out a documentary about what people avoiding the Ukrainian draft. You're going to get that anyway, and there isn't a great deal of. They said something like 20,000 people have avoided the trying to get out and avoid the draft. You're going to get that anyway. Russia's having a bigger problem with the brain drain. Why didn't they report on Russia and the brain drain?
You mean the 1 million people who fled? Yeah, a slightly different scale of.
Yeah, and it creates an image that Ukraine's having, and that's the BBC's doing that on many levels and many conflicts at the moment. It's time. It is just shocking, and I think there's been a call to actually. They're trying to make an inquiry into this reporting by the BBC that seems to be one-sided. And I don't know, it's not just them. There's a lot of social media platforms reporting because of something like the BBC does. So they put a story about Ukraine and the people trying to escape the draft, and it goes onto different social media platforms and gets spun out everywhere. Oh, there's a problem in Ukraine. It's not really reflective of the situation and where Ukraine is now. It's got other issues, really. Not that. And then the Russians pick up on it. They'll pick up on anything and then pump it out.
Of course, leverage it and weaponize it. Well, that's why I'm so grateful that the people like you are so active on social media to counter that messaging. Russian lies won't go away. You have to meet lie for lie with a truthful account of what's going on. You've been incredibly generous with your insights and stories, Shaun, and of course with your time. I know the audience are going to be fantastically grateful for everything that you've shared with us and everything you're doing as well. So we'll put a link to your book. We'll put a link to your social media profiles. I strongly encourage people to follow those. And if there are any links to your, you know, former battalion or any fundraisers, we'll get them in there. They will, of course, be on your social profile. So I encourage people to really get involved and, you know, support individuals who can guarantee that that money is going to a worthwhile cause, and where, you know, the individuals are still in the trenches. I think that's
a big thing we talk about at the moment. To be fair, we talk about you wouldn't do it at home. Don't give it to people you don't know where the money's going. We try and put that money at ground level. That's another topic. To be fair, that's
a whole other kind of worms there.
A whole other thing, yeah.
We can share validated links and so on, and people can follow you and know that there's a good chance it's going to make a huge difference. Shaun, thank you so much. I really hope, you know, we get to do this again, and I hope we get to meet as well. I'm planning on doing more events in Ukraine next year, so hopefully we'll get that opportunity.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.